I'd like to, first of all, welcome everybody with a few words of Irish, if I may. So, Taked Mila Falchero Goahandini. That's 100,000 welcomes to everyone. And I'm glad you were able to join us here today. So, fingers crossed, I'll start my presentation. And so over the next hour and a half or 2 hours, I'd like to try and share a better understanding of Ireland. And I'm always fascinated by this subject, but I must always say this is a generalization, because I think you know, you'll find different personality types everywhere in the world. So it is just really a generalization of, you know, when people ask me about Ireland, especially when I'm on tours or doing walks and talks. So to understand the personality of Ireland, I'm going to look at our geography, our climate, the weather, which is an endless source of conversation in Ireland, our colonial past, and settlement patterns and community life. So, with regards to our diverse geography, the island is roughly 480 kilometers in length, and about 200.
Sorry for interruption. Can you share your presentation, or should I assist you with it? It is not shown.
It is not showing, no?
Yeah.
I have it up on my screen, but I don't have myself. Can you bring me up, maybe my screen video?
I will share for you. One moment.
Right.
Case, please.
Yes.
Do you see my screen?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
So yes. So I just take up my own and. So will I press share screen?
Okay, you can try, but I have already sharing. If you want, you can share your own, but I can share it for you.
You can share the presentation.
Yeah.
Okay then. So yeah, so just despite its modest size, Ireland has a very diverse landscape, and this has led to a correspondingly rich diversity in land use, local cultural development, and accents even. So much of our current landscape, to understand Ireland, was formed around about maybe I'll take off my own video. How about that? That might be better, yeah. So that looks like a video screen. So Ireland's landscape was formed, a lot of what we see now in Ireland with regards to landscape was formed during the last ice age. So the last ice age finished around 12,000 years ago. But about 12,500 years ago, Ireland was cloaked by over 1 kilometer of ice. And as this ice moved in huge glaciers, it actually scoured out a lot of the mountains and river valleys and glens that we have now in Ireland. But another interesting fact about Ireland is that in most island nations around the world, Sri Lanka, for example, the mountains are in the middle of Ireland. Sorry, the middle of the island. But in Ireland, most of our mountains are in the periphery. They're on the edge of the island, and much of the center of Ireland is actually very, very flat. So this geography of coasts, you know, a very long, wild Atlantic coastline and our mountains makes for quite incredible scenery. So that's why Ireland is a very, very popular global destination for tourism. Now, the downside of this mountainous geography on our coastline is, though, that it leads to a lot of rainfall, which I'm sure your guests here today will have noticed as well. Some of the highest in Europe, but more about that shortly. So Ireland's climate is dominated by the Gulf Stream. Now, the Gulf Stream starts on the coast of Miami, believe it or not, in America, on the Gulf Coast. And it's a huge circulation of weather and water that takes up a lot of mild air and mild water up towards Ireland. Because a fact of geography is the island of Ireland is on the same latitude as Canada and Siberia in Russia. So without this North Atlantic current, or Gulf Stream as it's known, our island would be taking part in the Winter Olympics. And we would also have iced up ports in winter time. But you have to imagine this Gulf Stream as it's shown there in the visual, that it turns up, it creates this like insulation blanket around Ireland and much of Western Europe. The downside of this is, as well as bringing warm water to our shores, it also brings a lot of weather fronts. So our predominant weather, about 90% of our weather is created by this Gulf Stream system. So what you have typically in Ireland is waves of rain fronts coming in from the Atlantic Ocean in low pressures, and that's what gives us our weather. And I suppose it's an endless, there's positives about this, as I say. One of the positives is our winters are quite mild. The second thing is that we have, you'll probably know as well, we have a lot of sheep and a lot of cows. And in some parts of Ireland, where there's limestone bedrock, cows and sheep can stay out all year round. They're like free-range cows and sheep. This is unheard of in other parts of Europe. In most parts of Europe, it'd be too hot in the summer nowadays to keep sheep and cattle out. And in a lot of countries, it'd be too cold in the winter time. So we have a very mild or moderate climate. And because our weather, you'll probably notice, changes so much from day to day, hour to hour, it's an endless source of conversation with regards to weather. And so I'd like to go through a little bit about our weather, because it's a very important part of our culture. And thank you, Roxana, for the funny visual there. So talking about the weather in Ireland is still very much part of our Irish culture. So Irish people love to talk about the weather. I just realized this is the longest part of my whole talk today. So in the Irish language, after people exchange greetings, they talk about the weather. So interestingly, if one person in the conversation spoke negatively about the weather, the other person would tend to make a more optimistic stance. So an example of this is, you can imagine now two Donegal people meeting on the street. One might say, "Isn't it a horrible wet day today?" The reply would be, "It is, but at least it's nice and mild." And that goes vice versa as well. And in Irish, we have a lovely saying, "Tala bogey." Tala bogey. It means it's a grand soft day. So even if it's raining, at least it's nice and mild. And the Atlantic seaboard of Ireland gets an average of about 215 days of rainfall per year. And this goes down the further east you go. So saying that because we live on the Atlantic in Donegal, the weather systems pass quite quickly. So you might have rain for a couple of hours, and then suddenly the day can transform into a lovely, sunny, bright day, as I'm sure, again, you'll have knowledge of now. So if you want a tip, my first tip is if you want to have a conversation with an Irish person, learn to talk about the weather using these conversational tips. So how people deal with the rain in Ireland. Although Ireland is a rainy country, as I say, the rain fronts often pass quite quickly from west to east. A popular saying in Ireland is if you don't like the weather in Ireland, just wait a couple of minutes. Opposite to this is almost impossible to plan a picnic in Ireland, and certainly a barbecue. You'd be very, very optimistic to do an outdoor barbecue. So our Gaelic ancestors dealt with wet weather in that a lot of them wore a woolen cloak that was waterproof. They didn't treat the sheep's, a sheep have a natural oil, a waterproof oil in their wool. So when people realized that they should keep this oil in the wool when they were weaving these coats, or brat as they were known, they were like cloaks. They went right down up to they were hood on them, and they went right down to people's ankles. And people wore them quite a lot because it meant even if the weather was mild, they would take it with them, because if it rained, they could use it almost like an umbrella. And they were very, very warm. They were insulated as well. So the brat in medieval Ireland was actually exported, tens of thousands of them, to the rest of Europe. And that meant that when the Irish were fighting in wars against the English, they were able to stay out in all kinds of weather because of this waterproof clothing that they had. So another interesting fact is in Ireland, over thousands of years, we've learned to deal with our ancestors would have come from the Mediterranean area and possibly North Africa. That's the original newcomers to the original people come here. They would have been brown-skinned and brown-eyed, but over thousands of years, they lost their pigmentation, not only in their skin, but also in their eyes. So a lot of Irish people, including myself, have light green or light blue eyes. And that is to absorb as much light as possible in the climate. So if you have light blue or green eyes, you're in luck. So it's also why a lot of Irish people are prone to sunburn and freckles as well. You might have noticed Irish kids get quite a lot of freckles on their cheeks. So Ireland's colonial past, thank you there for sharing. Colonization has greatly shaped Ireland's history and culture and personality. For one thing, I'm speaking to you today, not in the Irish language, but in English, because the predominant amount of people now in Ireland today speak English as their first language. Unfortunately, all island nations are prone to invasion, because up until 100 years ago, the easiest way to travel with an army was by sail ship. So the Irish people learned to deal with colonialism by learning not to react immediately to new laws or conflict, but instead try and find a way around it or loophole. But this didn't always work. Sometimes it did. So because Irish people were denied land ownership for over 400 years, great emotional value is attached to land in Ireland. And that's why most of our land is actually in private ownership by individuals. So it's also, So the last part of this segment, I'd just like to deal with community life. And I'll do this very briefly. You'll notice in Ireland that if you're traveling by bus or car around the countryside, that there are houses scattered everywhere around the countryside. I know that in most of Central, Eastern, Western Europe, people tend to live in villages and towns and cities. But I suppose a unique fact of Irish people is that they were never like to live in urban developments, going back thousands of years. So the settlement pattern that you see when you drive outside, say, Letterkenny into the countryside, that's a very ancient form. It's called rural dispersed settlement. So you might have 10 or 12 houses in a valley, 3 or 4 of those houses, the people may be related to each other, but you could guarantee that they all know each other and they're all neighbors. And that has changed in the last, say, 50, 60 years with modernization and development. Younger people are moving into the cities now, like Dublin and Belfast. But if Irish people could, the majority of people still like to live in the countryside in what's known as a townland. So that's a group of 10, 12 houses where, I suppose the best way to describe it is you're in a community, but you have your own space around you. And a strong part of our culture was, so I suppose I'll share the statistic with you just to prove about the Irish people. Up until 1840, the population of Ireland was nearly 9 million people, but only 50,000 people lived in Dublin City. So over 8 million people lived in the countryside of Ireland at that particular time. And a very strong attachment to rural life. And one of the core parts of rural life in times gone by was called the mehel system. So this meant that if people got sick or too old to bring in their crops, the other people in their townland, in the rural area, they helped to do this for the people. So it meant that whenever there was work to do, people would help each other out on their farms, or if they had to build a house, or whatever. So it's called the mehel, is an Irish word. And I'd like to think that that still exists in Ireland in some form even today. So that's the first segment of my talk. So if anybody has any questions for myself or Roxana.
It looks like no questions.
Okay. So I'll move on to segment 2. We should be finished this around 15, 20 minutes. And then we're going to take a break then. Is that right, Roxana? We'll take a break for about 10 minutes. So people can have a break or put on the kettle for a cup of tea or coffee or whatever. So this is the second out of 4 segments I'd like to share with you. And this is in relation to the history of Ireland. And I imagine that this is probably going to resonate, or you'll probably relate to quite a few things that I'm going to share about Irish history, because I know that it's happening to other peoples around the world as we speak today. So the first part of it is Ireland has very, very interesting past. Because we were an island, back thousands of years ago, it was very safe to travel over land. There were great swamps and forests throughout Europe, and there was a lot of bandits and robbers and things like that there. And just people were very territorial. So the best way to travel back then was by ship. And we believe that the first people to come to Ireland came here. They were probably Phoenicians. They came from the Mediterranean and possibly also Berber people from North Africa. We don't know why that happened. It could have been environmental or it could have been cultural. Often if people were defeated in a battle, they had to leave their area. So the first people we think, as I say, came from the Mediterranean, southern Europe, maybe Spain and Portugal. And they were Neolithic farmers. So they brought domesticated cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, and chickens with them. But what's interesting is, I should say as well, before these people came, hunter-gatherers would have moved into Ireland around after the Ice Age. So they would have moved in around about 10,000 years ago. They would have lived totally off the land, kind of like Native American people or indigenous people in the Amazon. So they would have lived off the rivers, the fish, the wild animals that lived in the forests. So when the Neolithic people came, we don't know what kind of interaction they had with them. It depends on the culture. Some cultures, like the Americans, when they went to North America, they wiped out most of the Native Americans. But that didn't happen in South America or in parts of Asia all the time. So we don't know. But what we do know, that these Neolithic people, when they settled and realized the fertility of the eastern part of Ireland, they built these huge temples. And one of them, Roxana might share with you there, is Newgrange. Now, Newgrange is 5,200 years old, which makes it older than the pyramids of Egypt. Now, there's speculation about why people took so much effort to build the likes of Newgrange. On a practical level, it was a solar observatory. So from that time, 5,000 years ago until today, on the shortest day of the year, the 21st of December, a shaft of sunlight goes through the entrance of Newgrange and shines into an ancestral tomb at the back of Newgrange. So people knew, they were ready for this, and they realized that it was the beginning of the end of the winter, and they realized exactly then in their calendar where they were in that year. We also believe that Neolithic people had a very close, intimate connection even when people died. So they believed that their ancestors were very much still around them, and they would have built a place like Newgrange for their ancestors to come and visit and commune with them if they wished to do so. The other most important practical thing about this, people would say, oh, they were built for UFOs or something. It's totally crazy. They would have been built, as I say, for this solar observatory to commune with their ancestors, but also they would have put sheaves of wheat, like barley. I know, like, for example, Ukraine is a great country for crops, wheat and corn and barley. They would have put sheaves of this at the front entrance. So they believe when the sunlight came in, that it blessed their crops as well. Because back then, their survival of their civilization depended on crops growing each year. So, you know, when people say, oh, the Irish people are Celts, they're not strictly Celtic people. They've been here on the island as a civilization for over 5,000 years. So going on then to the next phase of our history, Celtic Christianity. So there you see an image of St. Patrick in a stained glass window. Well, Christianity spread rapidly in Ireland from the 5th century. And there's two reasons, I believe, for this. First reason is that it wasn't a fundamental religion, Christianity, when it came here. It took parts of the old pagan religion that the Neolithic people who built Newgrange, and they put a Christian interpretation on it, which, as we know, Christianity, when adopted in the right spirit, is a very peace-loving religion, and it would have cooled down the religion here or in Ireland as well from a lot of wars and battles and tribal warfare. So Christianity was adopted, we think, within 50 or 60 years, which is incredible. But we think the reason being is that we know that they cleverly packaged it up with the pagan religion that came before it, the elder faith. Another reason that Christianity, probably because the likes of Patrick must have been a very charismatic, very good person. Because the one thing that Irish people do not take is somebody coming in like a strong ruler or something like that there. But if they see, we say, a character in a person, then the people then would sit up and listen to what they had to say. And we know that from letters written about St. Patrick, that he was constantly writing letters to try and free slaves and try and stop battles between people and give women and children sanctuary from wars. So I think that the Irish people must have made some kind of heart connection with St. Patrick. He's now our patron saint. And on the 17th of March every year, we have parades all over Ireland. So it's a national holiday. So I really recommend this St. Patrick's Day to get involved, or even to take the family to the St. Patrick's Day parade, because it's a lovely way of celebrating the spring. And there's a carnival and there's music, and it's usually a nice festive atmosphere. So moving on from that, the waves of invaders. I'm just conscious about time here. The waves of the Celts would have been one of the main. That's actually an image of a Viking, which I'm going to get to very shortly. The Celts came here about 500 AD to 500 BC. Now, Celts, there's no nation of Celts as such. They were tribes scattered throughout Europe. We believe it from the center of Europe all the way to the south of Europe. But the Romans and the Germanic tribes were pushing them further west all the time. So we think that the Celts that came to Ireland came through Portugal and Spain, up along the sea route by ships, as I said to you. And they, contrary to popular belief, the Irish are not Celtic people. Even the language has not been confirmed as a Celtic language. It's an earlier indigenous language that adopted Celtic words in it. So the Celts, though, did bring superior metal working skills, and they were quite a warring people as well. So they brought a lot of new weaponry to Ireland as well. The next people to come here were the Vikings. And I'm sure we all know the Vikings. They're famous throughout the world. They get a bad rap for being raiders, but they were also traders as well. And I believe they traded all the way over to Eastern Europe at the height of their empire. So they invaded Britain via Normandy go back to the Vikings. They were from Scandinavia, primarily from Norway and Sweden and Denmark. Now, Norway is a very wealthy country, and Scandinavia now, but they weren't back then. The land is very poor. So as the population rose, they really were desperate to try and find new places to live. But luckily for them, they were world-class shipbuilders. They learned this from living off the fjords, the famous fjords in Norway. So when they landed, being fearsome warriors and on these ships, it was like a blitzkrieg. So it took about 50 to 100 years for Irish culture to recover. Now, luckily for us, they weren't interested in colonization. They were interested in our treasures, because part of the Celtic Christianity was we established monasteries all over Ireland. And there was a great development in making treasures, chalices, crosses, sacred manuscripts, books. And the Vikings were after this because they knew that they could sell them on the market. And so that's why one of the reasons that the Vikings came here. So our next, and they also founded our main towns, like Dublin, for example, is a Viking settlement, was a Viking settlement. Waterford, Waterfjord, Wicklow, they're all Scandinavian names. So the Anglo-Normans were the next people to come here, and they came to Britain via Normandy and France. They weren't interested in colonization either. They were interested in land. They were big farmers. They would have millions of heads of sheep. And they saw the east of Ireland again as land. So they pushed the native Irish people westwards. And they established towns there. But of course, they weren't popular for what they did. So they were the first people to build castles. That's why there's over 500 castles in Ireland today. And about 450 of them were built by Anglo-Norman kings or lords. But interestingly, the Anglo-Normans went native. They were here for a couple of hundred years, and they started to adopt our language. They started to adopt the music. They started to adopt the culture. They even started to wear the cloaks that we wore. And the King of England was disgusted by this. And he said that the Normans were becoming more Irish than the Irish themselves. So the Anglo-Normans kind of incorporated into the society. But then Queen Elizabeth I, this would have been an ancestor of Queen Elizabeth who died last year. Her advisors told her that Ireland needed to be colonized once and for all, because that they weren't adopting English laws and English ways. So they sent a huge army over to Ireland. But the Gaelic chieftains, for the first time ever, united together. Before, they were always fighting with each other, but this time they united, and they managed to hold back the English crown for 10 years. Now, if they had got more support from other countries like Spain, they probably would have defeated, they were very close to defeating the English, but they just ran out of weaponry and manpower. So this was the colonization of Ireland. And the 1600s was a very dark time in Ireland. Oliver Cromwell came to Ireland. He was a Christian fundamentalist. And he only stayed here for a year with his army, and they killed 1 in 4 people on the island, men, women, and children. And he is still today a hated figure in Ireland. So then we have another terrible time in Ireland, and that was the Great Hunger, or the famine. Now, the famine was the greatest man-made disaster ever to visit Ireland, and there have been other famines, but this was the worst. So by the 1800s, most Irish people were living as serfs. They could not own land. They could not own valuable horses. They weren't supposed to speak their language. They couldn't get education. So they were basically kept as serfs. And because of their rent, they had to pay rent twice a year to landlords. They had nothing. And you can imagine over generations, everything that they made, they had to give towards their rent to the landlord. So people through the 1800s began to live primarily on potatoes, because you can grow a lot in a small amount of land. So they had to eat potatoes nearly 3 times a day. They also had very big families because they needed to keep generating wealth to pay the rent to the landlords. And it was a vicious cycle that came to a head in the 1840s when a potato blight came originally from South America through the port of Philadelphia to Britain and into Ireland. And it was a disaster. The first year people managed to survive, but the second year the potato crop failed. It was terrible. So we believe that of a population of about 8.5 million by then, over 1 million, perhaps 1.5 million died of starvation. Another 1.5 to 2 million people emigrated. Basically, parents put their children on boats. They whatever money they had, knowing that they're probably going to die, but they sent their kids to like America or England in the hope that they'd survive. So the worst thing about it was, it's in Irish, it's not the famine, it's called An Garta Mór, which means the Great Hunger, because it was a man-made famine. There was enough food in the country to feed everybody, but the British decided that they wanted to get rid of a lot of the Irish population. So they stood back and let a lot of it happen. The Irish people, up until then, as I say, our kind of nature is we didn't want to combat the English, but that was it. Irish people never forgot the famine. Actually, the famine ended English rule, although it would take another 70 years for independence. That was we've seen how they allowed people to starve, so it wasn't going to happen again. So it brings us up then to the War of Independence. So although the Irish had tolerated English rule for 400 years, the famine was the beginning of the end for British rule in Ireland. So Interestingly, before the famine, we had something called the Gaelic cultural revival. So because after 400 years of colonization, people felt that their language, their Irish language, was second-class language. They felt that their culture was inferior. They felt that they were sort of inferior because they never knew anything else, only to look up to another race of people. So interestingly, Anglo-Irish artists and musicians and cultural people, they decided, no, there is an ancient history and culture on this island. So they began to put on plays, they began to write books, they wrote poetry. And slowly but surely, the Irish middle class, first of all, and then lower on, they realized that actually these people are right, that there is an Irish culture here as well. And there was a reawakening of national identity. So in 1916, interestingly, in the Easter Rising, it was doomed to failure, the first rising, but the people decided we're going to have our own self-determination. So a couple of hundred rebels gathered in Dublin. Interestingly, all the leaders were intellectuals. So they were all poets, writers, artists, but they bravely decided they were going to give their lives to start a rebellion in Ireland. And as a result of that, in 1919, there was a war of independence. Now, when the British fought, when the British shot all the leaders, remember these people are intellectuals, they're not officers. But when they shot them, that was it. The Irish said, we're getting rid of the English administration in Ireland. So there was a war of independence, lasted 3 years. So it was guerrilla warfare. So after that there, Ireland became the first country, the first nation in the world to win independence over the British Empire. That was a seminal point. Looking back now, that was a seminal point in our history, because for the first time, even though we were still poor, we had self-determination. So the next big change for Ireland was in 1973 when we joined the European Union. Ireland struggled under independence because remember we were ruled by Britain for over 400 years. So it took us actually 50 years to get our own confidence back. And really interestingly, if you want to look at the European Union, it has very idealistic creation. It was created after the horrors of the Second World War. A group of businessmen and thinkers got together and said, we cannot have France and Germany and Britain constantly at war. Why don't we set up a trading federation so people can get to know each other? And so this is the kernel of the European Union. By the time Ireland joined in 1973, it was developed. And so the key thing for us was, for the first time, we joined the European Union as an equal partner. So Ireland had a seat at the table. This was really a revolutionary thing for our culture. The second thing is, because we were quite poor at the time, the likes of Germany and France and these countries poured millions of euro into the Irish economy to develop a road system, to develop our infrastructure. It also brought free market. So for the first time, Ireland Irish people could sell their cattle, their cheese, their milk, their butter, they could bacon, everything. They could sell it throughout Europe as a free market. And we managed to get these goods then, like German cars and French foods and everything in. So it was a win-win situation overall. The other thing which was positive from my point of view was environmental laws. Ireland doesn't have great environmental laws. So the EU began to say, well, we can continue to do infrastructure, but you have to look at laws also with regards to women's rights, gender equality in society, and also the LGBT community and other minorities will be protected. So Ireland has adopted most of these liberal European laws now. And it's fantastic now. Irish people travel quite a lot throughout Europe. It's easy to do it with the euro currency as well. So the three pillars of the Irish modern economy are US corporate investment. We have a very strong link also with America because of all the Irish people that had to go there during emigration. So 50 million people in America claim Irish descent. The other pillar of our economy is agriculture, primarily beef and sheep and cows exported, and also tourism. I work in the tourism industry, and there's about maybe 150,000 people working in tourism. And a lot of the tourism relies on American people with Irish ancestry coming back to experience their old country of their ancestors, and also to find out their roots and where their people came from. So that's segment 2 of my talk today.
So, should we have a break? 10 minutes. And see everyone in 10 minutes. Thank you.
How's it going?
From the chest infection, you know, like there's a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Feel like my chest.
You are losing your mind. Yeah. But I have more tea if you want. Or you have nothing? You have the... No, but I just... You mean the children? Is it stronger? Are you sure?
Staying off the ears and stuff, people like it.
I wanted to show you because I heard that you are speaking about the invasion of the Vikings.
Yeah.
And this imagine, this is library of Trinity College Dublin, Ireland. You know, this is very nice calendar about a wonderful library. So this is in Ireland, and this is the codex from the Celts.
Yeah.
This is something so fantastic, you know.
I do talk about that actually.
Yes, it is 800, just imagine. And they also speak, look this. It is not no commission, who commissioned the manuscript. The book was probably stolen from the Church of Kells in 1007, buried, but recovered shortly. Afterwards, it was taken on the Corcoran. Yeah. And because this is written here, that when the Vikings invaded, you know, the island, they they killed how many? 60 monks, because it was on the. But this is very interesting.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful work.
It is. It is a word. It's a word treasure.
What is exactly?
No.
Word treasure. Just do this. And that time.
You see, another reason for this was, as I try to sometimes explain, that when these books.
Here, okay. Vikings attacked the British Island.
800.
Yes, it is 4 or 6 months. Survivors fled to Celts.
Yeah.
They burned.
You see, when these books were brought after the Dark Ages, the collapse of the Roman Empire. Okay. They open them, you see, like laptops.
There's the Gospels and everything in big gospel in this parts of Europe. So then they opened them up and then they went, oh, look. So this was one of the reasons to still wonder again and learning them. So,
How much work is in it?
but a lot of it's done, you know, that before Christianity came to Ireland, they reckoned that there were 11 schools for the Druids. They reckoned that the Christian church did indeed one. The Druids. The Druids decided to amalgamate Christianity. And this school, they reckon, they got from all over. So even for Christianity came, there was that. And the fact then that during the fall of the Roman Empire, the Goths are them, they didn't come to Ireland, but it was like a sanctuary.
Yeah.
So that's where the learning continued.
Yes, I don't want to, because you want some, I see you have some, is it helping you?
Yeah.
Because I have some other for coughing.
Do you know, I'm not coughing, but I knew that would happen on the thing, you know, that she didn't know.
You should put them. No. And especially when you are in Netflix also, so this is very difficult.
But if I, you know, if I knew that I just.
Yeah, something for
Choose so much. I think I'm not in schools. I'm not talking. Different things. I'll just say anymore that if they watch it, they wait till I come back and there's a talk slide. And if they want to workshop.
Yes.
But anyway, shall we come back?
Have a rest, okay. But I can bring you this.
Jana's making lunch. Jana's making lunch.
I make my.
Well, Jana's making lunch, I think, as well. Yeah.
This will smooth your throat.
Oh, that's fine. No, I think one minute.
So, hello everyone. I believe we can start our second session. Case, are you with us?
I am indeed, Roxana. I think because my video is not working too good, maybe I will put it if the guests for the talk don't mind, I might switch it off.
I don't mind.
Okay.
I believe our participants don't mind too.
Oh, okay.
So I will share presentation as we did it before.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so moving on to section 3. I envisage actually we'll be finished in about 40 minutes time, just to let everybody know. If anybody wishes to ask me a question then about anything in the talk, I'd be happy to answer. So the culture of Ireland. So I know the first part of the talk was particularly the last segment was quite serious. But I wanted you to get a sense of Ireland's troubled history. But I guess I finished on a good note in that Ireland now, for all that we've gone through, is a modern European economy. And I'd like to share now about our culture, which is also is experienced a renaissance. So the first part I'd like to talk about is traditional Irish culture. So while the Irish language is still struggling, other aspects such as traditional Irish music are thriving. There have never been as many young people playing traditional Irish music or singing traditional songs. So traditional Irish music, like all ethnic folk music, every country has its own ethnic folk music that goes back centuries. I don't think that I have ever heard anybody's ethnic folk music in the bit of traveling I've done around the world that I didn't in some way appreciate or enjoy. So you'll see in that scene that Roxana has shared for us, you see that's taking part in a pub, a traditional Irish pub. And traditional Irish pubs are a very vibrant part of Irish culture. I suppose it's no coincidence that people have tried to build Irish pubs all over the world. I know where where we sometimes live in Slovakia, in Bratislava, there are 2 Irish pubs. In America, they're all over the place, and even in England. And it's a very vibrant part of our culture. It isn't really about the alcohol as such, but it's about people gathering to talk, to share news from the locality, to meet their neighbours, and also to sometimes enjoy traditional music and storytelling and singing as well. And so one of the unexpected positive, and there wasn't many of them, about the Irish famine was that traditional music and culture became classless. So in Gaelic society, it was often the upper class people who played music like the harp or the violin or instruments like this, or even did poetry or storytelling. They were a high sort of a caste of Gaelic society, but they were all gone after the colonization of Ireland. Most of our upper middle class either were killed or they had to emigrate to other parts of Europe. So this was interesting in that the love of Irish music and culture was still there, but it then went to the serf class, to the farming people, to the poorer people in Ireland. And that continues to this day. You know, most people learn their music. If anybody shows any particular interest or skill for playing traditional music or singing or storytelling, it's very, very much developed. And it doesn't matter how much money your parents have or where you live. So another popularity to share with you, I suppose, an insight into Irish culture is our Gaelic sports. So our Gaelic games, Gaelic football and hurling, have never enjoyed so much popularity. They are also very, very popular. Now, what you see there is Donegal in the green and yellow, canary yellow colours. And that was one of our heroes in playing the game, Michael Murphy. And that's one of our greatest rivals is Dublin in the blue shirt. And you just see the determination on those 2 players. And even though our stadiums are world class, the players are voluntary. They don't get any money for playing. And this is the popularity of our Gaelic games, is that there's 32 counties in Ireland, Donegal being one of them. When the English colonized Ireland, they created counties along the tribal boundaries. So the people of Corcoran, who very much still have a sense of where they're from, became County Donegal. So in a way, that sense of tribal belonging is very strong in Ireland still. And that has transferred, thankfully now, onto the sports field. So players in either hurling or Gaelic football will train all year round for very little financial reward. They're playing for the honour and the pride of wearing their county colours and being selected to play. Because if you play for your county, you'll always be known and respected in your county, even when you retire. So hurling, which I don't have an image up here for you now, but it's played with sticks with and a small ball. Well, hurling has been played in the island of Ireland for over 2,000 years. We know that a hurling ball, was uncovered in a bog, and it was dated to over 2,000 years ago. And it's also the fastest field game in the world. So Donegal, as you see here, a player, Michael Murphy from Donegal, has a medium good football team and play in the first division in Ireland. So the Gaelic Athletic Association, the GAA, it's a voluntary organisation, is the most successful voluntary sports organisation in the world. So I explained just that it's along this it's tribal pride to play for your county colours. So moving on then to some unique folk beliefs and customs in Ireland. So Irish people, because we live on the edge of Europe, a lot of superstitions, they might be called, or ancient beliefs, have survived in Ireland where they haven't survived in other parts of Europe. And one of them is to do with this bush that you see growing in the field. Even though that's growing in a fertile field, the farmer who owns that field would take great care not to touch a branch on that tree, because that tree might be known for maybe 1,000 years as a fairy tree. Now, fairy belief is very ancient in Ireland. So in other parts of Iceland, for example, they call them elves, in other parts, gnomes. But they're these nature spirits that people very, very much believe inhabited this world along with ourselves. And up until my grandfather's time, 9 out of 10 people in Ireland believed in the fairies. And my next book is actually about that and trying to examine where these belief systems come from. I can tell you it's a very, very interesting topic to look into. So another thing would be, so people believed that at certain times of year, wintertime, lights could be seen coming from these fairy trees, and that the fairies gathered along trees like that and traveled from tree to tree through the landscape at very high speed. So it would be very handy if you were a fairy back then. So other things is making St. Bridget's crosses. You might have heard that we celebrated St. Bridget's Day on the 1st of February. This is another very ancient Celtic festival. St. Bridget now is regarded, she was probably an historical figure who became a saint. She established the first Christian convent in Ireland, but she also was perhaps a Celtic goddess. So there's two interpretations of Bridget. The other thing is traditional festival days in Ireland. So New Year's Day is celebrated in this part of Europe on the 1st of January. St. Bridget's Day, which I mentioned, that's on the 1st of February. St. Patrick's Day, which I mentioned earlier. Easter weekend, which is the beginning of Easter this year. May Day, which was another very important Celtic festival, but not so much now. Halloween, which is a really interesting one. Halloween is celebrated throughout a lot of Western Europe now, and particularly in America and Canada, places like that, where a lot of Irish people went. Well, Halloween has its origins in Ireland. This was, again, going back to people's ancient belief system that spirits could wander the world at that time, wander the earth around Halloween time. So a lot of our customs that are celebrated now, like the pumpkin carving, trick-or-treating, dressing up, they go back into Irish prehistory. And then Christmas Day, which I know is interesting. Here it's celebrated on the 25th of December, but I know it's different in other parts of Europe. So Ireland and popular culture. So moving on, there's no denying Ireland's cultural impact on Western culture. For example, just a couple of weeks ago, Irish actors and films received a record number of Irish nominations for the Oscars, which were held in Hollywood in Los Angeles. So one of the movies I really recommend checking out is The Banshees of Inisherin. And if Roxana, if you could change the next screen to yeah, so there we have St. Patrick's And if you could go another one. Yes, there he is, Bono. Still jumping around the stage, leaping around the stage. And there you see the other members of U2. So U2 were one of the first international groups to make it big in the United States back in the 1980s. And are still massively popular worldwide. So other globally known Irish music acts include Enya, who's from Donegal, the Cranberries, Van Morrison, Sinead O'Connor, Rory Gallagher, who's also born in Donegal, Snow Patrol, and Hozier, and the list goes on. So for a relatively small country like Ireland, they've had a huge impact on popular culture through films and through cinema and through music, and also through our authors, with a lot of writers as well, and poets who are recognized throughout. So moving on then, the British government, so that's it. That brings us to our final segment. And it's getting to know Donegal. So I assume that most of you who are tuning into this presentation talk, this is the final segment, are living in Donegal. So I thought about it and how I maybe could relate. I mean, I'm a native of Donegal. I'm also a tour guide. So I'm also an author. So I kind of have to try and look at my own county sometimes from an outside perspective as well. So if Irish people, so we'll look at the personality of Donegal, some facts about Donegal, 15 fun places to visit in Donegal, 10 unique cultural things to do in Donegal, fun tips for fitting in while in Donegal, and if that's not enough, some tips for understanding Donegal English, and the best of luck with that. So moving on to the personality of Donegal. If Irish people as a nation are known worldwide for their friendliness, then Donegal people are particularly renowned for their warmth and hospitality in general. This may be down to a number of factors. Firstly, the climate and landscape and poor land means that Donegal people understand the concept of hardship, which often imbues empathy. Traditionally, most Donegal communities were reliant on fishing, subsistence farming, or travelling abroad to the likes of Scotland or London to look for work. So also due to Donegal's remote geographical location, see we're on the right northwestern corner of Ireland, next to Northern Ireland. The culture has survived here, folk beliefs and music, traditional music and that, and the Irish language more than it has in other parts of Ireland. So some facts about also the pace of life in Donegal. I always find it a bit of culture shock when I leave Donegal and go to Dublin, because Dublin now is a modern, busy capital like any other capital in Europe, where people are rushing around. It seems to be in a very busy, stressed state. And you go to Donegal, and especially when you speak to more rural people, even they speak slower. It's just a different, it's a more, I call it a more human pace of life. So some facts about Donegal. Remember I was telling you about the highest rainfall counties in Ireland? Yes, I'm afraid Donegal is up there near the top. Donegal, though, has a very diverse landscape and a long Atlantic coastline. So you see them, Roxana's very kindly shared that. If you trace your finger along, you can see how many bays and inlets there are. And this Atlantic coastline, whenever American tourists come, this is where I bring them, along the coastline, you know, because it's very, very picturesque. Even in when the weather's not so good, it's still very dramatic. So 2/3 of Donegal is considered mountain, moorland and bogland. And a fact is there are more sheep in Donegal than people. So we're hoping that the sheep don't get too smart and decide to take over sometime. So 25,000 people in Donegal still speak Irish as a community language. And that's really around the northwest of Donegal. So Donegal is steeped in traditional music and culture, producing such stars as Enya, Daniel O'Donnell, Clannad, Mairead Nimwini, and Rory Gallagher. And Donegal Bay, which is in the very south of the county, is the largest bay in Ireland. The port of Killybegs is the largest fishing port in Ireland, and Mount Errigal is the highest mountain in Donegal. So Donegal is was one of the last counties. There you see an image of Errigal, 751 meters, and a very popular place to go climb in good weather. From the top of Errigal, you can actually see the west coast of Scotland. So Donegal also shares the longest border with Northern Ireland. And interestingly, I talked about American tourists, but a lot of people from Northern Ireland, from Belfast and Derry, they come to visit Donegal every year. In Northern Ireland, Donegal is the most popular county in Ireland to visit because it's so close to them as well. Letterkenny is our principal town. It's where most of our good shops, big shops are. It's our hospital, our general hospital, and our college, our third level college here as well, and also administration, government buildings. A lot of them are in Letterkenny. So 15 fun places to visit in Donegal. So I wanted to share with you places, some of them that in this list you can visit for free. The County Museum, for example, it charts the history of Donegal from ancient times into modern times. Now, anybody living in Letterkenny, I definitely recommend a visit to the County Museum, and they'll be very welcome in there, I can tell you. So the Glenveigh National Park is one of the largest and picturesque national parks in Ireland. And for anybody living in or around the Letterkenny area, but even most parts of Donegal, Glenveigh is very, very close, and it's not that expensive to go to visit as well. Another place is Dunluey Loch, and they have a visitor centre and an indoor and outdoor play area for kids. Another interesting new place in Donegal is Wild Ireland. So there's this guy, and he set up a sanctuary for wild animals that maybe came from the likes of circuses or zoos or that and are unwanted. So in this park, it's in the park enclosure, you can see wolves and bears and lynx and other wild animals. And that's quite popular with young people. Ard's Forest Park is not far from Letterkenny, and it has a children's playground and woodland walks on a beautiful beach. Then Mount Errigal, which we saw, it's very popular in summertime for people. They've built a new path there now, so you can walk the whole way up to the summit. So the Doe Isle Famine Village, which is right in the screen on your right-hand side at the bottom down, that's really, really interesting. I think it's about €10. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's around 10 euros visit, but you'd easily spend a couple of hours there visiting all the exhibits. And then, because, you know, Derry is very, very close by to Donegal. It's only a half an hour by public bus from Letterkenny. And Derry is a very historic city and a very nice city to visit on a good day. Also, you see on the top corner of the screen there, Drumbo Woods. That's in Ballybofey. And it's a town near Letterkenny. And it's a beautiful forest park. And they have a fairy sculpture trail as well, also for children. So that's Drumbo. Oakfield Park is not far from Letterkenny either. You see, you're really, really lucky. Because tourism is such an important part of our economy, we have all these attractions. So moving on then, Omagh Folk Park, which you see in the bottom part, that is really interesting. And it tells a story of emigration from Ulster to America in the 18th and 19th century. And that hill fort there, that's free to visit. You don't pay anything to go in. And on a nice day, you can see 3 or 4 counties of Ireland from the top. So that is a real nice thing to visit, or even organise a bus to go to on a nice day. And then Glencolmkill Folk Village as well. And that landscape image you see next to Drumbo Woods, that's Slieve League. And Slieve League are 3 times higher than the Cliffs of Moher. And it's one of the natural wonders, in my opinion, not only of Ireland, but in Europe. So they're among the highest sea cliffs in Europe, and definitely worth a visit while in Donegal. So fun tips for fitting in when living. We're nearly finished our talk now, but I decided to write down some fun tips. And I mean, these are only generalizations, but, you know, if I was to sum up a general personality of Irish people, I think sometimes a bit of their friendliness and their warmth comes from being a bit sensitive as well. You know, we are a bit of a sensitive people, and it's something to take into account. You'll rarely see Irish people openly aggressive towards each other. It really would mean that it's going to be a bad row. So people tend to try and, when possible, be civil to each other. And one of the things that you'll, if you do if you do get a car in the future, or you have a car, is never ever beat your car horn if there's somebody in front of you, unless it's an emergency. Because I know in places like New York, they beat their horn all the time to let people know where they are. But in Donegal, it's almost like an offence. So I give you an example. If I was going down the village street and I beat my horn at somebody, they would find out what my car name was, why was I beeping the horn at them, and the whole family would get annoyed about it. So that's why you'll rarely hear people using their car horn in Donegal. Another thing that Irish people say, and I've thought about it quite a bit, is they say sorry. So say, for example, if you're in a supermarket, often even you don't have to bump into somebody, but if you get somebody close to somebody, they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, sorry. And again, it's just a kind of I think it's a more polite thing than anything else that people do. You don't have to explain yourself. People just say sorry. And so, I mean, one way to fit in, if it happens to you and you find yourself getting close to somebody in a queue or that, just say sorry. So it's just a part of our local culture to do that. So 3 is, let me see, I think, as a rule, don't take your shoes off if you're invited into someone's home in Donegal. I know that in other parts of Europe, it is a custom to do that, to take your shoes off. In Donegal, for whatever reason, it isn't. And if you do take your shoes off, they might think that you're moving in to stay with them. But anyway, it's just a culture. I thought I've got a funny cultural difference. If Donegal people say they are going to meet you at such a time, then Roxana will probably have experience of this now. Take it as a guide rather than an exact time. So unlike German people, for example, or Japanese, Donegal people are not the best timekeepers in the world. So if they don't come right on time, if you usually give them 5 or 10 minutes, they will appear. So if you happen to be in a pub and someone buys you a drink, make sure to buy one back, even if you are not having another drink yourself. So I kind of missed a few things as well, so I'm just going to go briefly back. 10 unique cultural things to do. So one of them would be, I recommend, attend St. Patrick's Day parade in your local area. Go and see a traditional music session, live performance in a pub, which is free. Even if you want to go in and buy one drink, you'll be able to stay and listen to the music and singing. Attend a Gaelic football match. You know what I was talking about? It's very much part of our Gaelic games. Well, if there is a Gaelic football match happening in your local area, you know, it's a couple of euro often just to go in and see, and you can experience the atmosphere for yourself. Also, for anybody with younger kids, watch out in the summertime, the GAA put on summer camps. So usually kids from the age of 6 years of age or upwards can take part. So you don't have to be Irish to take part in this here. And often it'd be a great way to meet other kids in the area as well. So go to somewhere like Loch Derg, which is a day trip to see the ancient Christian pilgrimage there. Take a ferry over. You can see from the image there, Roxana, that's a fishing trawler, also a car ferry. So we have islands like Arranmore Island and Tory Island on Donegal, and it's a very unique day experience to go and visit them. Go to a beach. Donegal has some of the nicest beaches in the world. And on a warm sunny day, pick your day and just experience a beautiful beach walk. As Donegal is a top tourist destination, also the places that I shared there with you to visit as well. Enjoy a fresh seafood meal. So Ireland, and particularly Donegal, is renowned for its fresh seafood. So if you want to try mussels or seafood chowder or seafood pasta. And then the other thing is to look out for, and maybe the Volunteer Center, we might even give this list out. There is festivals around Donegal, particularly in the summertime. And a lot of these festivals are outdoors, so they're free. So they're a great way also if one's in your area. I mean, there's a very famous music festival in Ballyshannon where they have a lot of outdoor gigs. And there's a very nice atmosphere there because, you know, it's not just for Donegal Irish people. A lot of people come from all over Europe to attend that music festival. So watch out for music festivals. They usually in Donegal happen in the summer months. Another famous one is the Errigal Arts Festival around Letterkenny. And sometimes a lot of these events are for free. And another one is the Halloween Carnival in Derry City is regarded as one of the best Halloween carnivals in the world. And that's one to check out as well. So finally, going back to our cultural things, if you're making tea for a Donegal friend in your house and they refuse, ask them again and they will probably say yes. Now this is a very interesting culture going back to after the famine. So one of the things would have been is that often people didn't have tea in their houses, but they still wanted to offer tea. So usually the code was if somebody asked first, you refuse. And if they didn't have anything to give you, they wouldn't ask again. But if they ask a second time, if the person asked a second time, then they would accept a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Another thing is if a total stranger meets you on the street, and I know this because the older people have told me this here, older people, particularly in Donegal, tend to are very friendly. They'll say hello to you. So, and this is only a tip. If you meet somebody on the street where you live and they say hello, then say hello in return when you walk past. And the best thing is just, even if you don't know them, just smile and say hello. And it just creates the kind of, in Donegal is one of the few places that still custom still exists. So if a Donegal person tells you a joke or a funny story and you don't understand the punchline, it's better just to laugh along anyway. We do that all the time. And some of the best ways to get to know local people in your area is through attending a church, a sports group, or like this photograph suggests, joining one of the many volunteering groups, and you'll instantly gain a team of friends. So finally, some fun tips for understanding Donegal English, and the best of luck with this because it's not easy. First of all, I was just thinking the other day, a lot of people in Donegal, they don't say they're going somewhere, they say they're heading somewhere. So they'll say, are you heading to the shop? Or are you heading to Dublin? Which is really just going to Dublin. Interestingly, if you ask somebody in Donegal how they are, often means they'll say, oh, not so bad. Well, not so bad means they're actually doing good. But if you ask them how they're doing and they say, I'm grand, that means they're not doing so good. So we use it all the time. Would you like a wee cup of tea? Would you like a wee bag with that if you go into a shop? We simply means small. And it's a Scottish thing that Donegal people, in Scotland, they say we all the time. They say, you wee baby, or you know, they just use we for small. Wild. Now you might have Donegal. I know Donegal people use this all the time. They'll say like, God, isn't it a wild bad day today? Or God, you're a wild man. Or they'll say, God, it's wild warm today. Or God, you're a wild woman. Well, wild is just used to emphasize a point. It can be used mostly, it can be used either negatively or positively. So if people say, God, it's a wild warm day today, it just means they're it's very warm. And if they say, God, you're a wild woman, it doesn't mean that they think that, God, this person's wild or they've come from the forest or something. It just means it's just emphasizing. It's kind of used as a term of endearment. So ignore curse words in Ireland, folks. You'll probably hear the F word all the time. But the curse words in Ireland are just sprinkled in the conversation. So, you know, effing and being and stuff like that there, often it'll be just used for emphasis when they're telling a story. And it's not used that much to insult somebody. So hi in Donegal is sometimes placed at the beginning of the end of a sentence, and it means nothing. Hi. So here's an example. Hi, that's a good day out there. Hi. It just means nothing. It's just a slang word, and I find a lot of young people still use it as well. And another one is the word. I think that's enough actually for today. So good luck with that, folks. And that brings my presentation and talk. So I hope that as it concludes, and we got finished up a little bit earlier, that just like to thank everybody who took the time to tune in. And I hope that my presentation has given people an better overview now of Ireland and Donegal, and some cultural tips maybe as well going forward. And sure, maybe in the future I might meet you in person again for a similar talk. And thank Roxana for helping me with this presentation as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I do hope that our participants found out something interesting, something new. I'm very grateful to our participants for their time, for their interest in Irish culture, and we plan to do more such sessions, some such offline sessions in the future. So actually, it's a good opportunity to learn something new, to learn English, to improve your English. So that's our job now. So if anyone have any questions, please, you're welcome to ask them to Case. So it can be something that you wanted to ask, that you maybe didn't know whom to ask, but now you can. I mean, some kind of Irish culture things or something else. Case doesn't know Ukrainian, but I will translate him such messages in chat. So people are very grateful for your presentation, and there is Svetlana. She lives in Balibufey, and she is very happy that she lives specifically in Donegal. So, and it was really very interesting.
Well, thank you. It's good to know.
No questions? Folks, please, maybe you want to know where to buy fresh seafood or something else. If Case no, of course. So, if no questions, You
Maybe
can
it's a good thing. Maybe I covered a lot of information.
maybe I believe so. So as I said, I shared my phone number in meeting chat. You can contact me if you have any questions. I mean, maybe not about culture. I'm not such professional as Case, but maybe I can help you with some like information about volunteering. So you can visit our website, Volunteer Donegal, and find something interesting for you. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time once again. Case, thank you. One moment, I will find a suitable smile, like claps. Yeah.
Thank you.
I believe you see it. I hope.
I do indeed, yes.
Great.
Thank you very
great.
much.
Thank you. And I wish everyone a good day ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.